Anyway, we are finishing up our series today on celebration. We're going through some of the festivals in the Bible and what that teaches us and how we can learn it. It really came out of a quote I got from Mark Batterson, where he said, "I don't believe that our greatest shortcoming is not feeling bad enough about what we've done wrong. I think our greatest shortcoming is not feeling good enough about what God has done right. When we under-celebrate, we fall short of the glory of God." And so we spent the past 3-4 weeks talking about different celebrations. And today we're doing an interesting one in that this is the one you probably have heard of as much as any, but you know the least about. Because we're going to be talking today about Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. And you know, if you're like me, you don't know a whole lot about, you just know it exists. It's coming around, it's like the Jewish holiday that comes near Christmas. And so that's kind of what we think about. So I thought what we could do is I just show you a brief educational video to kind of catch you up a little bit about, just teach you a little bit about Hanukkah. So let's go ahead and just watch this educational video.
Put on your yarmulke, here comes Hanukkah. So much funaka to celebrate Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the festival of lights. Instead of one day of presents, we had 8 crazy nights. But when you feel like the only kid in town without a Christmas tree, here's a list of people who are Jewish, just like you and me. David Lee Roth lights the menorah. So do Kirk Douglas, James Caan, and the late Dinah Shore. Guess who eats together at the Carnegie Deli? Bowser from Sha-Na-Na and Arthur Fonzarelli. Paul Newman's half Jewish and Goldie Hawn's half too. Put them together, what a fine-looking Jew.
So if you're like me, that's all you know. That's it. That's the sum total. We've exhausted everything you know about Hanukkah. So I thought we'd talk about that a little bit because it does show up in the New Testament one time. And it's an interesting passage, and I think we'll have fun looking at it, but you need to understand the background for Hanukkah, the Festival of Dedication, the Feast of Lights, whatever. It's got a number of different names. And the reason we don't know much about it is because it comes in the gap between the Testaments. There's the Old Testament and the New Testament, and there's a 400-year gap in there. And it starts during the gap. What we've got is, if you come to the end of the Old Testament story, you've got the Jews were sent into exile in Babylon, and they end up staying for 70 years, which is quite a while. At the end of that time, they come back out of exile. God rescues them from their exile, and they come back, and a guy named Ezra comes back, and a guy named Nehemiah. And Ezra helps them build a temple, get temple worship reestablished, and Nehemiah comes along, and he builds the walls around the city, and he acts as the governor. So as we come to the very end of the Old Testament, we've got a functioning government in Jerusalem and a functioning temple where they can do sacrifices, and the Jewish faith is moving forward. But in 400 years, stuff happens, and the biggest thing that happens is Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great happens, and he just happened all over the Middle East there. And he came along and just basically took over everything. Now, the good news was he was so busy conquering everybody, he didn't mess with religion that much. So he let the Jews continue. They worshiped in their temple. They continued to have offerings and all the festivals they did. And then he died at a very early age. And he had no heirs, so his kingdom got divided up among his generals. And one of them got this section and one got this section. And the Seleucid, guy named Seleucid, or the Seleucid Empire, he took over in the area of Palestine, and he was the king in Palestine for about 150-ish years. Until one of his heirs was a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes, which is a great name. If you're pregnant, remember Antiochus Epiphanes. It's underrepresented as a name. But one of the reasons he doesn't get people named after him, in addition to the fact that how in the world would you label a kid with that, is Antiochus wanted to make everybody Greek. Have you seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding? Okay. If you weaponized My Big Fat Greek Wedding, you would have Antiochus Epiphanes. He wanted to make everybody, he's spraying Windex on everything. He is fully committed to the Greek lifestyle. And he wants to turn all the people in Israel and everywhere else in his kingdom into more Greek, which means you don't worship just one God, you worship lots of gods. And so he literally comes into the temple in Jerusalem, the place that is dedicated to worshiping the one true God, and he turns it from a place where you worship just one God, he turns it into a shopping mall for gods. He sets up worship of lots of gods in there, and to make his point firmly, he goes to the official altar, the big altar, the altar where all the major sacrifices are made, and he sacrifices a pig. And if you know anything about Jews, pigs are on the don't eat that list. And so he completely defiles the temple. Completely, it's now useless for the Jews because they can't use a temple that's completely defiled. Well, this really ticks them off. The Jews are now completely upset, and there's a guy named Judas Maccabees. His family is a powerful family, and Judas Maccabees, after Antiochus does that, he goes full on Mel Gibson. I don't know whether you want to do Braveheart or I blanked on the what's the or the Patriot, whichever it is, he goes all out Mel Gibson. If they do a movie, they'll have to find a young Mel Gibson and let him play it, because this is what he does. He goes all out, goes into guerrilla warfare, that sneak around, pick people off, come back out, go back in again, real strategic, and he manages to lead the Jews to overthrow or at least drive out the Seleucids, the Greek army. He drives them away, and now they've got their city back. And so they set about the process of making the temple usable again. They have to throw the altar out and bring in a brand new one. They have to do all these ceremonial cleansings, and it takes a while. And when they get done, they have what they call the Festival of Dedication, the Feast of Dedication. It's going to be like a week long, and they're going to honor God with this new, and it's a really big deal. It happens to be in December, close to Christmas. That's why you think of Hanukkah and Christmas together. It's because that's when they got the temple clean. And then, according to the legend, now we don't really know if this is true, but this is the legend that goes with it. As they're getting ready to start the first Feast of Dedication, they have to have the menorah lit for that, because there has to be light in the temple. And the problem is, when they go, you ever do a party and you forgot something obvious? You're having people over and you realize you've got like 7 ice cubes. You know, something like that. You got like 1 cup of ice and you got all these people coming and you need ice and all that. Okay, well, they get ready to start the Festival of Dedication, the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, and they realize they have enough officially approved olive oil to light the lamp for 1 day. And it's a week-long festival. Because you can't just use regular olive oil. The priest has to approve it. It has to be hyper-kosher. All this stuff has to happen. And so they've got one, and they do the first day. They take the oil from the vessel, they pour it into the menorah, and it does fine the first night, of course. They go back the next day, and there's still enough oil, and they do it again. And the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And so for the entire festival, they're able to use just this one container of oil, and it takes care of all their needs for the entire festival. And so they renamed the festival, or also named the Festival of Lights. And so it becomes very, very much part of the symbolism to light up all the lights, to have lots of bright lights, and it's a well-lit, fantastic festival. And that's what it comes to, and it works its way through all the way up until the time of Jesus. Even after the Romans come in and take over, they're still celebrating all these festivals, and Jesus shows up at the Festival of Lights one time that we know of. He may have come other times, but we've only got one time we know for sure that Jesus shows up at Hanukkah. He celebrates Hanukkah one time, gets his dreidel out, does the whole thing, okay? That was a Jewish joke for those of you who are into those things, okay? And in John 10, we're going to read a good bit, just work our way around this passage. And about halfway through it, Jesus shows up at Hanukkah. And here's what it says. It was now winter, and Jesus was in Jerusalem at the time of Hanukkah, the Festival of Dedication, or the Festival of Lights. He was in the temple walking through the section known as Solomon's Colonnade. And that doesn't seem like much, but there's something odd to me about this thing. This is the Festival of Light. It's a festival of joy. It's a festival of happiness. And the first thing that John says, it was winter. Now, we have people who like winter. I don't dislike winter, but I like northern winter. You know what I'm saying? Where there's cold and there's snow. If you're going to have cold, bring me snow. Okay, let's do this right. Let's go sledding and hot chocolate. The whole if we're going to do it, let's put our money on the table and do it right. Well, Israel doesn't have winter like that. Israel has winter the way you hate it, which is what? Cold and rainy. So it's a cold and rainy day. We know part of that because he's on the section known as Solomon's Colonnade, which is like a porch. It's a covered section with it. Most of the temple, I don't know if you know this, was wide open. You could just walk around, and the sky was directly above. There was no roof over most of the temple. The majority of the temple didn't have a roof on it. There were big courtyards. Well, Solomon's Colonnade was an outdoor section with a roof, and so Jesus is there because it's a dank, cold, wet probably day. That's an odd way. There's no mention of joy. And as we look at the rest of this section where he talks about it, there's no mention of the fact of anybody recognizing who Jesus is. Matter of fact, they're attacking him the whole time. It's kind of, if you think Festival of Lights, celebration of dedication, this is like the opposite. And what's happened is, they're at the Festival of Lights, and the light of the world is there, and they completely missed him. They didn't see him at all. And so I want us to sort of work our way around this festival time here. I don't want us to be like that. Is that okay? So what do we celebrate instead of missing it? And the thing they were missing the most that we need to make sure we do is we need to celebrate who Jesus really is. Because what was their problem? They had an expectation of Jesus, and Jesus didn't live up to it. They had an expectation for Messiah, and Jesus wasn't that person. And so they rejected him and didn't see him. Okay? And Isaiah knew this was going to happen. He said in Isaiah chapter 9, nevertheless, that time of darkness and despair will not go on forever. So where are they at? Darkness and despair. The land of Zebulun and Naphtali, two of the states in Israel, will be humbled, and there will be a time in the future when Galilee of the Gentiles, which you may have heard of, remember this is written hundreds of years before Jesus. He talks about Galilee, which is where Jesus did most of his ministry, which lies along the road that runs between the Jordan and the sea, will be filled with glory. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. And the sad thing is, the light has shown up, and they don't see it. And we need to make sure that we're seeing Jesus. And I've been known to say things that are a little bit controversial. Once or twice a week. The thing that they miss the most is the same thing we will miss, is we don't see Jesus for who he really is. And so I want to make sure we're celebrating Jesus for who he really is. Like, for instance, one of the things that we'll see in this that we see in this chapter about who Jesus really is Jesus is our light. Matter of fact, in chapter 8, Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. In chapter 9, Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. In chapter 10, the light of the world shows up at the Festival of Lights, and nobody saw him. I think because we misunderstand what that means. Let me help you understand. When we say Jesus is the light, what does that mean? Light helps me see. Light helps us see. And so it's about seeing properly. A few years ago, Kim and I were on a little mini vacation, just the two of us. We got away for a weekend, and I forget where we were at. I think it was over near Asheboro or something. Or anyway, we wanted to see a movie. Remember movies? Remember those? Weren't they great? Those are, boy, I miss movies. So we want to see a movie, and one of the Spider-Man movies was out. And so we went to the theater there in the area where we were, and we go in and we do okay, I'm going to give you a brief teaching on how you do movies. Okay, this is how you do a movie. Okay, you go in and you buy the ticket for your movie. That pays the distributor. That pays Warner Brothers. That pays Disney. That pays them. Now, I want to make sure the theater stays in business. So also go in and I buy my popcorn, I buy my drink. And the $50 later, I've got popcorn and a drink. Okay? And that's me supporting the theater. But I'm not an idiot. So I got my candy right at the Dollar Tree. On the way to the theater, you stop at the Dollar Tree, you get your candy, you stick it in your wife's purse, you go in, you hope there's not a strip search because you're going to get busted if they do, right? So you go in. So we go into the theater, and we've got our popcorn, we got our drinks, we got the candy stash, we got our tickets, we're ready, and we go in to the theater, and they point and they say, that theater right there, because there's like 17 theaters in this different movie theaters. And they say, that door right there. So we walk in that door and we go sit down, and now comes the hard part of watching a movie, which is getting all the popcorn and all the drinks and all the candy and everything distributed so that you're in your seat. Because once you get in the seat in a movie theater, you're going to be there for a few minutes, just because leaving is so hard. Right? So we get situated, we get our drinks, we got the popcorn, we're good to go. It is Spider-Man time. And we're watching, and they're doing that. We got there. They're already doing a couple previews, and suddenly a preview pops up that says, "Now put on your 3D glasses." We weren't going to the 3D movie. We were going to the regular 1 or 2D movies, maybe 2, not 3. But we got the popcorn set up. We got the drinks set up. We got everything set up, moving at this point. And plus, we were running late, so the movie's about ready to start. We don't have time. We don't have resources. We don't have the U-Haul it's going to take to get all this stuff to the other theater. So I do what any resourceful person would do pre-COVID. I slip to the back of the theater, wedge my arm down in the glasses recycling thing, steal 2, blow them a little bit, and we wore them. And we come back, and I come back down, and they're already starting the previews for the 3D stuff, which means you're looking at this. You ever take your glasses off while they're doing a 3D movie? Everything's all blurry and just doesn't make sense, all right? And you put the glasses on. There it is. Okay. So I guess if I were going to retranslate it, I would say Jesus is the 3D glasses of the world. Jesus is the one that brings the world into focus. As we go about today, and I don't know if you noticed, the world's kind of crazy right now. And a lot of times you say that doesn't make sense, but when you put your Jesus glasses on, people are acting like Jesus said people would act. People are doing things that Jesus would say they would do if they're fallen creatures. C.S. Lewis put it this way: I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. Jesus brings the world into focus. It starts making some sort of sense. Matter of fact, when you're looking at the world and it stops making sense, when I'm not saying people aren't doing things that are stupid, but when you just can't figure out what's going on, you need to make sure your Jesus prescription is right, because you're not understanding it from his perspective properly. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's one of the things Jesus brings us. When we celebrate who Jesus is, and you bring Jesus as he really is into a situation, he makes the world around him, no matter how crazy it is, make sense. Okay, if you watch him walk around, it was always, there's this calm in the middle of all the chaos, and there's Jesus. Okay, now he's our light. He's also our protector. We see this in John 10. Where Jesus says about himself as part of this same speech that he's about to give. He says, my sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life and they will never perish. No one can snatch them away from me. No one can take them away from me. Jesus is our protector. Jesus keeps us safe. Jesus is, as he talks to here, Jesus is the shepherd. Okay? And I think we miss that one too. I think if we're not careful, because we want to see Jesus a certain way. We're like the Pharisees. We want to make Jesus into our image. We want him to behave the way we want him to behave. But the reality is, Jesus behaves the way Jesus behaves. And we have to acknowledge that his protection may look different than what we think it should. Somebody called me a few weeks ago, maybe a month, and said, I'm getting ready to do a documentary on racism. We'd like to get a pastor's thoughts on biblical concepts when it comes to racism. Would you like to be in our documentary? And I said, yes. What I didn't say was, are you really that? They're like out of people for documentaries. Like they called everybody else, and there's Steve. So anyway, yesterday they came out to film it or tape it or record it or whatever you do in modern technology. And they come into my office and rearrange all the furniture, cleaned off my desk. That was such a win. That means I'll have to do that again for another year. And they set it up, and And the woman who's who's making the documentary is here, and there's a camera here and a camera here, and I'm supposed to talk to her between the two cameras the whole time. And she has a list of questions, and she gives them to me late. She gives them to me, right before I'm talking to them. I get like 10 minutes to go through the questions to look at them. And she comes to the last question, and I didn't remember it at all. And the question, to expand it, was, okay, what biblical admonition or encouragement would you give somebody who's really struggling during this time? Maybe somebody, a person of color, who is really feeling challenged during this time. They're feeling discouraged. What would you give them to encourage them? And I had zero thought about that. I had not thought about it at all, so I'm going. So the brain is like, wrong, wrong. You can smell it. The engine's running up here, and it's burning up the oil, and it's really not going well. And I start talking, and I'm not saying anything of value. And the back of my brain is saying, there's you've got the chute you can pull to escape. Because I've got Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to His purpose. I've got that thing right here. I can pull that thing out if I need to. But I don't want to do a cliche, and I don't really find that it's all that helpful sometimes when things are really bad to pull that specific. But I've got it. I've got it on call right here. And if I need it, I just push the button, and we eject into Romans 8:28. And I talk for 2 minutes and say absolutely nothing of value. And finally, something just sort of, my brain's kind of whipping around, and I finally go, wait, can I start over? I said, if I'm going to talk to somebody and they're feeling discouraged in this time because the culture's not going the way they think it should be going, and they want to speak into that culture, I would probably take them to Jeremiah chapter 1. Because in Jeremiah chapter 1, God calls Jeremiah to be a prophet. And he's just a young, maybe a teenager. And God said, I want you to be a prophet. And God calls him, and he tells him two things. Number one, I want you to go wherever I tell you to go. Just don't ask. If I say go there, go there. And when you're there, I want you to tell them whatever I tell you to say. So you go where I tell you to go, and you say what I tell you to say. And then God tells Jeremiah, and by the way, for the most part, they're not going to listen to you. For the most part, they're going to ignore everything. You're going to pour your heart into this, and they're going to yawn. God tells Jeremiah this to start his whole life out. This is what your life's going to be. You're going to go where I tell you to go, and you're going to say what I tell you to say, and most of the time they're going to ignore you. And I said, if I'm going to encourage somebody in this time, what I'd say is that. You go where I tell you to go, and you say what I tell you to say, because you need to be focused on eternity more than now. I said, if you think about it, Martin Luther King Jr., he had some amazing impact. And there were breakthroughs under him, and it was a time of movement in racial issues. But he wasn't the first guy to talk about it. There were generations of people who stood up and said things that mattered and said them that were right, and they got totally ignored. And Martin Luther King Jr. stood on their shoulders, and he would acknowledge that other people paved the way by repeating and doing and saying things that were right, even when nobody was listening. And they kept saying it, and they kept saying it, and then Martin Luther King Jr. comes along, and he says it, and there is huge progress in a very short period of time, relatively speaking. And you never know when God calls you into a situation, as God calls all of us into a situation, whether what we say is going to have monumental impact or whether it's going to have no impact. And our calling isn't about our impact. Our calling is about our faithfulness and saying the things we're supposed to say and living the way we're supposed to live. And if God chooses for us to be people who are part of the monumental progress, that's okay. And if my only job in the pyramid of God's progress is to be one more person on top of somebody else's shoulders so somebody else can stand up there and get their voice out, that's fine. Because God's got it under control. I'm part of God's kingdom. I'm part of His process. And it's really not that important. And somebody like me needs to hear this person who wants to get things done needs to hear it is more important that I speak truth and do it faithfully than how much impact I have, because God's in charge of changing things. Does that make sense? And so when God protects it doesn't mean God protects us in such a way that all things work together for a good right now. It means God makes it so things work out to the good of God's plan and you as a person. And so that was a longer version of what I told them. But God works through us, and Jesus is our protector, okay? No one can snatch people away from Him. And the third thing I see when I see who Jesus is our light. He helps us see things properly. He's our protector, so we can do whatever He wants us to do. We can do it with safety and security, knowing that in the end, He's going to make it all work. And then He's also, and it just ties right into that, Jesus is also our destiny. Jesus is our destiny. He's where we are going. John 10:10, right before we read what we just read a second ago, Jesus says, I came they may have life and have it abundantly. He's our destiny. He's our fulfillment. Can I say this? We have a really bad habit of wanting okay, how about I say this? I have a really bad habit of making my fulfillment not found in Jesus. My fulfillment comes in the things I do for Jesus, the things I accomplish for Jesus, how much I succeed, how much I get done. Is that anybody else? Anybody got the, how much I get done is how I judge. Now, my destiny is Jesus himself. Okay? And so Jesus is there at the Festival of Lights, and he is light. He's the light of the world. Like I said, he said it in chapter 8, he said it in chapter 9, and they still weren't listening when they got to the Festival of Lights in chapter 10. And he's all these things, and they missed it, for the same reason we miss it. Can I tell you why they missed it? They missed Jesus, they missed the Messiah, because he didn't look or act like they thought he should. And the Jews missed Jesus because they weren't celebrating for who he really was, and we do the same thing. How much did they miss him? How much did they miss the point? Jesus is, let's get this right. Jesus is talking in chapter 10 all about being the good shepherd. We love Jesus the good shepherd, don't we? You ever seen all the artwork about Jesus the good shepherd? And that's some of the sweetest stuff. You've got Jesus with his big old eyes, looking down at this little lamb. He's got this lamb, and he's holding it like it's a baby. And that lamb's looking up at Jesus. Jesus looking up down at that lamb. And it is, oh my goodness. It's like Jesus loves kittens. I mean, that's really what it's about, isn't it? Jesus, and we have this picture of Jesus, and that's the Jesus we want to see. Can I tell you what happened to the Jesus who spends that entire chapter talking about being the good shepherd? Let me show you what happens when Jesus talks about what kind of a shepherd he is. It says, once again, the people picked up stones to kill him. How could you kill baby kitten Jesus? Because there is no such thing as baby kitten Jesus. Jesus said, at my Father's direction I have done many good works. For which of them are you going to stone me? They replied, we're stoning you not for any good work, but for blasphemy. You, a mere man, claim to be God. You didn't say the right stuff. You didn't do the right stuff. You didn't say the right stuff. You don't look like Messiah is supposed to look. And that's what the Jews did. You didn't look like Messiah is supposed to look, and therefore we're rejecting you, and we do the same thing. We have this picture of what we want Jesus to look like, and if he doesn't live into our expectations, we reject him. Now, I have a weird thing that happened in my life that gets me in trouble all the time. Because you guys know a lot of this story. I came to Christ when I was in 5th grade. I became a believer in 5th grade. And my dad wasn't yet following Christ. He became a pastor within a few years, but at the time when I accepted Christ, when I was in 5th grade, he wasn't really a Christian. My mom hadn't even accepted Christ yet. My dad wasn't living as a Christian. And there was nobody. It wasn't like, we got this children's ministry where we give them stuff to take home and work with their parents on stuff and, all these things that we do. Like if you're online, here's the stuff you can download and talk to your kids about today. There was none of that at our little church. There was no what we would call discipleship. There was no training. It was just show up at church, and honestly, the pastor had one message. He preached the same message every week. It was just... And so it was kind of up to me what kind of Christian I'd be. And somebody told me, I've told you this before, somebody told me I should read the Bible. So I did. And I should read it every day. So I picked it up, and I'd get my little Bible, and I'd go in my bedroom, and I had bunk beds. My little brother had the bottom bunk. I had the top bunk because my brother would have jumped off the top bunk every chance he got. And I would go, and I would just open my Bible right before I went to bed, and I'd read a chapter. I figured a chapter a day is reading the Bible, so I would do that every day. And I had a disadvantage over a lot of people because there wasn't anybody telling me what parts to ignore. See, if you're part of a good Christian tradition, an awful lot of the good Christian traditions tell you they're parts of the Bible, you're not really supposed to pay attention to that part. Those are the words we don't like. Those are the parts we don't like. So, when you read those parts, don't really pay attention to those. Just ignore those and get to the stuff we like. And every group, it seems, has their stuff. And I didn't know that. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to read the whole thing and love the whole thing. And I thought when it says that all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine and for reproach and for correction and for training in righteousness, I thought it meant it. I thought it meant the whole book. So when I'd read part of the Bible, I'd read it and go, oh, God said that. And I should figure out how to live that part. And I didn't know I was supposed to ignore stuff. And it really gets me in trouble all the time. It still to this day gets me in trouble because I'll be reading the Bible and I'll get up and preach on something right out of the Bible, and I don't know I wasn't supposed to preach on that part because there's a tradition that says you're supposed to ignore that part. And so here I am telling people to live into parts of the Bible that other traditions say you're supposed to ignore. And I get in trouble all the time because nobody told me I'm supposed to ignore parts of the Bible, because I'm supposed to see the Bible their way. I'm supposed to interpret it according to a box, and that box for so many people isn't Jesus. Now, I'm not saying I always get it right, but I try, and I don't ignore any of it. And if I get in trouble for it, I'm 57. I only got, 15 more years of this. I can stick it out. Keep doing that. And they picked up stones to kill him, and we ignore parts of it. Can I tell you what the greatest danger? I don't know why that verse is back up there again. I think the greatest obstacle to encountering God in the Bible is when we respond to it with, yeah, but. When we come to the section of the Scripture and we say, yeah, but that's part of the part I'm not supposed to. That part makes me uncomfortable. I don't like that part. Yeah, but. Guarantee you, every time you do this, you're blocking God's Spirit from working in your life, you're blocking who Jesus really is, and you're blocking yourself from becoming the person God designed you to be. Can I challenge you? I'm going on vacation starting as soon as I finish. While I'm gone, read the book, and don't ever say, yeah, but. Read the book and let it speak. Read the book and say, hey, this part means I'm supposed to live this, and this word is valuable, and this principle is good, and I'm supposed to live the entire thing. Can you do that? You don't have to do it the rest of your life or nothing. Just while I'm on vacation. I'm going about 3-4 weeks. You can handle it. Just for a month, read the book and believe it. And don't let anybody tell you you're not supposed to believe parts of it, and don't let your mind go, yeah, but, to the parts you don't like. Okay? Now, I've got 2 other points I want to cover really quick that just kind of flow out of that concept of being who Jesus is. Because one of the reasons that, let me just read this part real fast. Because it's right after it says that Jesus is walking around in the colonnade and, everybody's ignoring him and nobody's getting it right. And so people surround him and ask, how long are you going to keep us in suspense? If you're the Messiah, tell us plainly. We can't tell if you're Messiah because you're not acting like Messiah, so we don't think you're Messiah. And Jesus replied, I've already told you, and you don't believe me. Here's the thing, he hadn't told them. You can't find him saying, Messiah, that's me, I'm the Messiah. Okay, but what does he mean then? I've already told you and you don't believe me. The proof is in the work I do in my Father's name. John the Baptist got kind of freaked out because he didn't think Jesus was living into what he thought Jesus should be. And if John the Baptist does it, almost anybody can. And he sends word to Jesus because he's in jail, and he didn't think jail was going to be part of his job as being forerunner for Messiah. He thought forerunner for Messiah meant you get to be second in command when Messiah takes over the world. He didn't think it would be lounging in jail. And so he sends word, Jesus, are you the Messiah, or should we wait for another? And Jesus replied to him, go back and report to John what you hear and see. Go back and tell him what I do. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Don't worry about what I say. What do I do? And what that tells me and what that tells us is we look at who Jesus really is, and then we need to worry about celebrating our actions and his actions more than his words and our words. Not more than his words, but more than our words. Celebrate actions more than words. Put that in 2 words, live it. Or put it another way, see Jesus as he is and do what he did. Live Jesus. Read the book. Okay? Understand what Jesus says about himself from his word, and then do it. Doesn't sound that complicated, does it? That's Christianity. See who Jesus is and be like him. That's really what living the Christian life is. See Jesus clearly and live it. Now, let me help you with one piece on this, because this is important. It's going to lead into the close. We'll get out of here today, don't trust me. Now, make sure you don't get this. People don't belong to Jesus because of what they do. So if I'm not saying do these things so you'll be a Christian. I don't say act like Jesus so you'll have a relationship with God. No. People do what they do because they belong to Jesus. In other words, quacking doesn't make you a duck. But being a duck means you quack. That make sense? You hear that? Because it's not you acting like a Christian, it's you living who you are. So you see Jesus, you have a relationship with Jesus, you see him as he really is, and you live into that. You start acting like Jesus. What did Jesus do? And we saw a list there. He took care of the poor, the hurting. He proclaimed the good news. He cared about the least and the lost. And he lived it, okay? Now, one more quick thing. Because we want to see Jesus for who he really is. And we want to celebrate our actions more than our words. And then we finally get to celebrate being one of Jesus' own. Celebrate being one of Jesus' own. As part of the speech that he gave when they said, "Who are you?" Yeah, you didn't get the blank. Celebrate being one of Jesus' own. He said, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life and they will never perish. No one can snatch them away from me. For my Father has given them to me." I told you this about being protected by him. "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life. They will never perish. No one can snatch them away from me. For my Father has given them to me, and he is more powerful." Where am I at? He is more powerful than anyone else. "No one can snatch them from my Father's hand. The Father and I are one." Now, when he said my Father and I are one, that's when they decided to stone him again. So that was part of that. But no one can snatch me from my Father's hand. Did you know that's true about you? Did you right there? Did you know that's true about you? No one can snatch you from your Father's hand. Did you know that? Did you know that? No one. Did you know that? No one can snatch you from your Father's hand. You have been brought into the presence of the real Jesus. Not one that we've made up, not that one that we've colored, not the real live, honest to goodness Jesus. And we are allowed to behave like him. We're allowed to become like him, and no one can take it away from us. Wow, what would you do with that information? Celebrate, maybe? Maybe celebrating would be the right thing. That we should be rejoicing because Jesus was bold enough to say, "I and my Father are one," and powerful enough to pull it off. Okay? Now, let's go back to Jerusalem. The light of the world is walking through Jerusalem during the Festival of Light, and nobody can see him. Sad. They're fighting him. They're trying to stone him. They're trying to arrest him. It's a constant fight, and he's in the temple. By the way, do you know the Festival of Light, Jesus is the light of the world. The temple, Jesus is the temple made human. In the temple, in the Festival of Lights, nobody saw him. Then the chapter ends this way. Once again, they tried to arrest him, but he got away and left them. And then this part. He went beyond the Jordan River, near the place where John was first baptizing, and stayed there a while. He goes away from the lights. He goes away from all the things where people are saying this is what Messiah is supposed to look like. All the people saying you should be this. He got away from that. And when he did that, many followed him. And then the people who followed him said, "John the Baptist didn't perform miraculous signs," they remarked to one another, "but everything he said about this man has come true." And many who were there believed in Jesus. When you get away from the Jesus you want to believe in, When you get away from the Jesus that people tell you should believe in. When you get away from all the false images of Jesus Christ and you see Jesus as he really is, that's where faith comes in. That's where you can believe in him. Can I challenge you? I told you I want you to, for the next month, to actually read the Bible. Just read it. Just let it speak. Do you want me to tell you how and where? Go to that little place where Jesus went there. That place where the distractions aren't there. That place where you have met Jesus in the past. For some of you, it could be a, deck of your house. Could be a room. It could be your car. Make a point this next month to seek out Jesus as he really is. To seek out a place where the distractions, where all the noise, where all the commotion, where all the people that are yelling, where all the people telling you what you're supposed to be, who you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to look. Get away from those people and listen for him. Listen to Jesus and then live what he says. That's where real faith comes in. That's what we need right now. Because there's an awful lot of cacophony. There's an awful lot of noise out there. There's an awful lot of people who are telling you what Jesus should do. And it's stuff, a lot of the stuff they're saying how Jesus would behave, you know in your heart it's wrong. You look at this person who's proclaiming Jesus and you go, well, that doesn't look anything like Jesus. I read the book and he don't look like that. I've read the Gospels, the books about Jesus, and that doesn't look like him at all. Get away from that. Get away from the noise. Get away from the confusion. Get away from all the chaos. And every day, read the book. Read about Jesus, and then live what you read. It'll change you, and it might change the people around you. It might do all kinds of good if we quit focusing on what everybody tells us Jesus is supposed to look like and start listening for who he really is. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, when I talk about Jesus and you accepting Jesus, that's the Jesus I'm talking. I'm not talking about some politicized thing. I'm not talking about some painting with the doe-eyed Jesus holding a lamb. I'm talking about the guy who lived his life so passionately and well that people who loved him were willing to die for him, and people who hated him wanted to kill him. And I don't think you'll live to those extremes. But you shoot for it. You shoot for seeing Jesus as he really is. And if that's the Jesus, you'd like to have a relationship with that Jesus, what we do here is we have these blue bags, and we've got some on the back platform. We've got some back in the back corner, in the back tables. If you want to have a relationship with Christ, just grab one of these blue bags, and we'll connect you with somebody, and we'll talk to you about how to have a relationship with him as he unpack the bag, and just do that. If you're home, just email Steve at spoutsprings.org, and I'll be glad to talk to you about having a relationship with Christ, how to do that. If you have a relationship with Christ, the next step is to announce it, to be baptized. Jesus went to where John was baptizing. Jesus was baptized there. And to announce that, just let us know. It's baptism at spoutsprings.org. We'd be glad to hook you up and get you baptized as soon as we can. We've figured out a way to do it that we think is pretty safe. And so we're ready to start breaking that out anytime now. And so just let us know about that. It could be as if you're in the auditorium, there's something and you want to pray about what we've talked about, somehow something just elbowed you a little bit. We've got a cross in the corner. You can just wander over there during this next, we're going to do a quick piece of a song. And just go over there and pray if you'd like. Take communion. We've got a communion station here. If you're home, I encourage you, don't rush out of this. Don't rush to the next thing in your life. Take a moment, digest what God may have said to you during this. Digest it, pray about it, decide how to live it. If you want to take communion, grab some juice or juice-ish substance and something like bread and take communion. Remind yourself of what Christ's done for you. Because you're going to go back out. You're going to turn off the internet, or you're going to leave here, and they're going to start yelling at you about who they think Jesus is and how you're supposed to live for Jesus and what that looks like. And I want you to remember, I want you to dig into that reality of who Jesus really is. Can I pray for you? Father, thank you for today. Father, I thank you that Jesus is real, and we need to look at him as he really is. Help us to see you clearly and to live towards you. Father, I pray for those of our people who are deployed or out of the area right now. Keep them safe, keep them pure, bring them home soon and safe. And for us, help us to live for you, to listen to you, and to be the people you created us to be. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.